In 1941, when Russian archaeologists excavated Timur's tomb, his coffin read, "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." 2 days later, Hitler invaded the USSR. Timur Tamerlane was born on April 8, 1336, and until his death in 1405, this genocidal Turco-Mongol conqueror piled the skulls of his enemies in wooden towers. Extending from Ankara in the west to Delhi in the east, the Timurid Empire rivaled the size and power of the Mongolian domain forged by Genghis Khan a century earlier. But compared to Timur, Khan's brutality was mild, to say the least. Timur eradicated 5% of the global population, or roughly 17 million people. But more horrific still are his methods of quote-unquote extermination. He could neither hold a sword nor mount a horse, but his mind came up with heinous torture techniques that would make even Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele shriek. Welcome to Uncharted History. Join us as we take a gander into Timur's sickening mind and his brutal atrocities that made his enemies writhe in pain. History's evilest man was a cripple. Timur was born on April 8, 1336, as the son of Taragai, a minor nobleman. The young man shared a common ancestor with Genghis Khan named Tubanani Khan. In his youth, Timur led a band of thieves who attacked and raided travelers on the road. They preferred stealing animals, horses, sheep, and cattle, because it was easy to sell them. One day in 1363, when Timur was 27 years old, he tried to steal a sheep from a shepherd. He spotted the young thief and sent a barrage of arrows at him. 2 arrows hit Timur. The first one hit his right knee, and the second arrow pierced Timur's right hand and severed 2 fingers. Timur was disabled for life and earned the nickname Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane. This disability would mark the start of Timur's reign of horror. Timur's first victim was a family member who he decapitated on a technicality. After moving to Persia, he collaborated with his brother-in-law, Emir Hussein. The alliance proved fruitful for both. Tamerlane and Emir found success as mercenaries for local warlords, growing their power and realm. By 1366, the Tamerlane and Hussein alliance gained control of Transaxion. As their power grew, so did their hatred for one another. The relationship between Timur and Emir went south when Hussein failed to kill Ila Koja, then governor of Maurana, a region now modern-day Tashkent. He was directly disrespecting Timur's orders. Finally, things came to a head when Timur's wife and Hussein's sister passed away. With no familial ties, their hostility turned into open warfare. After suffering initial defeat, Timur negotiated a truce that allowed him to return to Samarkand, while Hussein returned to his power base in Balkh. In 1730, Timur advanced on Balkh, hoping to catch Hussein unprepared. After the 2-day skirmish, Hussein agreed to surrender under one condition. Tamerlane had to promise he wouldn't execute Emir. Timur joyfully agreed and stayed true to his word. Timur did not execute his former brother-in-law. He ordered one of his officers to do it. So, technically, Timur did keep his promise. After Hussein's death, the troops sacked Balkh and massacred en masse. With this decapitation, they would lay the foundation of the Timurid Empire. Dissatisfied with Balkh, Timur set his sights on another prosperous city. Although overflowing with riches, the Persian city of Isfahan lacked one crucial detail: an army to defend it. In 1387, when Timur's army reached Isfahan, the citizens wisely surrendered to spare bloodshed. Timur accepted. He placed thousands of his soldiers in Isfahan and imposed heavy taxes. What do you think happened when a conqueror overtaxes foreign land? The city revolted and killed 3,000 of Timur's men stationed in Isfahan. Furious, Timur returned to Isfahan. After a short siege, the city fell. Tamerlane's rage showed no mercy to Isfahan's population. To punish the insurgents, Timur ordered all the women and children to be taken to a plain outside the city. Every child under the age of 7 was tied and laid on the ground. Timur ordered his cavalry to gallop over the children's bodies. When his counselors heard this, they begged Timur to reconsider, but he didn't budge. Tamerlane reiterated the order. With no one to step up, the cavalry disobedience enraged Timur, so much that he rode his horse across the children's bodies first. "Now I should like to see who will not ride after me," Timur yelled as he turned to his soldiers. The The riders followed suit, and 7,000 children's bodies screamed in agonizing pain as Tamerlane watched. After Timur's leave, each soldier was given a quota. They would have to bring a predetermined number of decapitated heads each day. Those who couldn't were slain. Frightened, Timur's soldiers slaughtered 70,000 men, women, and children. Historians say the army erected 28 towers and filled each one with 1,500 skulls. The smell was so horrific that Timur's counters vomited numerous times before finishing the job. The horrifying image of Tamerlane stomping over the bodies and heads of children loomed over the empire, but the genocidal conqueror was hungry for more. The bickering sultans of Delhi and their civil wars led to the slaughter of the entire Delhi army and 100,000 innocent Hindus. While conquering new lands in Persia and Iraq, Tamerlane learned about the political instability in Delhi. Two sultans were fighting for power. Timur wasn't interested in the Indian Empire, but he was drawn to their wealth. Using the anarchy and chaos to his advantage, he prepared an army of over 90,000 and crossed the Indus River on October 30th, 1398. On his way to Delhi, Timur laid waste to Talamba. His army encountered a resistance force of 2,000 on their way to Dipalpur, but Timur's 90,000 men squashed them without stopping. The army captured the fort of Batner and enslaved 100,000 people in the Indian campaign before finally reaching Delhi in December. But do you think a horrific warlord like Tamerlane would feed 100,000 Hindu slaves before a war? Of course not. Instead, the soldiers slaughtered every last one, fearing a revolt. On December 17, 1398, the drums of war raged. Although weakened, the Sultan possessed a formidable army. His force also included 120 war elephants with poisoned tusks and chainmail armor. While other warlords would shudder at the thought of facing war elephants in the open, Tamerlane knew the beasts were easily frightened. All Tamerlane's camels were loaded with wood and hay. As soon as the war elephants approached, Tamerlane ordered the camels to be set on fire and prodded with iron rods. The camels charged forth, while the hay and wood on their backs burned their skin. Spooked by the howling camels and the fire, the elephants turned around and charged at their own lines, disrupting the unit integrity in the Indian army. Acting quickly, Timur advanced on the fragmented Delhi army and emerged victorious. But Timur's killing spree had just begun. After the battle, Delhi was reduced to rubble. Innocent people began retaliating but were slaughtered in the streets. After 3 days, the stench of decomposing bodies filled the air. Timur returned to Samarkand with 90 elephants laden with precious stones on their backs. However, the fallen soldiers and civilians weren't enough to quench Tamerlane's desire for war. By 1402, Timur would cage one of the world's most powerful sultans and exhibit him like a monkey. In 1399, Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I and Egyptian Mamluk Sultan Nasir-ud-Din Faraj attacked and annexed Turkmen territory in Anatolia. Little did they know that Timur was the sovereign over the Turkoman rulers. An attack on them was an attack on Tamerlane himself. The warlord advanced towards Georgia and Armenia in 1400. He captured and enslaved an estimated 60,000 locals. Drawing closer to the Sultan, Timur attacked Syria, where he sacked Aleppo and Damascus, where only artisans were spared. On his way to Baghdad, Timur stopped in Sivas, modern-day Turkey, and sacked the city. The town's garrison was composed of mostly Christian Armenian soldiers. Timur told the 3,000 defenders of the city that no blood would be shed if they surrendered. They did, and Timur stayed true to his word. Not a single drop of blood was spilled. Instead, he buried them alive. By the time Tamerlane reached Baghdad in June 1401, he was furious and merciless. Death toll? 20,000 people at first. Later, troops were given a quota of heads to collect for the newly erected skull pyramids. At least 2 heads per soldier were demanded, and to fall short of the quota meant to lose your own head. Before long, the soldiers ran out of people to slay, so they resorted to killing prisoners. When this didn't suffice, they began beheading their own wives in a desperate attempt to placate their leader. 90,000 victims, mostly Muslims, were gutted that day. 90,000 skulls were placed inside 120 putrid towers of death, erected throughout the city of Baghdad. As battles raged on and Timur drew closer and closer to Bayezid I, they continued exchanging insulting letters with one another. All tabs were settled. On July 20, 1402, during the Battle of Ankara, Timur's 140,000 army struck the forces of Bayezid I with such might that the battle was over in a day. Later, Timur returned home with a precious gift. Tamerlane took Bayezid I as his prisoner. He locked the Sultan in a small iron cage. Whenever Timur's dinner guests would arrive, the cage was placed in the middle of the dining room table, and Timur fed the Sultan food scraps. Meanwhile, the Sultan's wife was stripped naked and forced to serve the guests. Timur planned to invade China's Ming dynasty shortly after his conquest of Ankara. The invasion began in December 1404. En route to China, Timur became deathly ill. He died on February 18, 1405, at the age of 68. Some say he relieved the world of the greatest evil, himself. It is safe to say that until Hitler came into power, Timur stood as a supreme example of soulless militarism and sadism. Future generations should learn about his vile ways of torture, so they are never repeated. This is History Uncharted, and we'll see you next time.